Not with a fight, not with screaming, not with the kind of dramatic confrontation that movies promise you. She found out with a photograph, one image on a phone screen, delivered by an anonymous number at 9:47 p.m. while the rice was still warm on the stove and her son was drawing dinosaurs at the kitchen table. Nia Brooks Kwan looked at that photograph for 11 seconds. She counted later, reconstructing the moment the way you reconstruct a car accident, frame by frame, searching for the second before impact where everything could have gone differently. 11 seconds. Then she set the phone face down on the counter, finished serving dinner, watched her son eat, bathed him, read him a story, and waited until he was asleep. Then she packed a bag. If you've ever watched someone's life fall apart in slow motion, you know it doesn't look like the movies. There's no swelling music. There's just the sound of a zipper and a child breathing in the next room, and a woman deciding quietly, completely, without any drama at all, that she is done. If this story already has its hooks in you, stay with me. We're just getting started. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The rain started somewhere over the Yellow Sea and didn't stop until it had soaked every street in Seoul down to the bone. Jaehyun Kwan sat at the head of a table that cost more than most people's apartments, on the 54th floor of a building that bore no nameplate, no corporate signage, nothing that would tell a passing stranger who owned it or what kind of business happened behind its floor-to-ceiling glass. The restaurant existed for one purpose: privacy. The chef came in at 4 in the afternoon, cooked for one table, and left before 9. No other guests. No record in any reservation system. The waitstaff had signed documents their lawyers would never let them discuss in public. It was the kind of place where men like Jae-hyun ate when they needed the city to pretend they didn't exist. He was 41 years old. His hair was shot through with gray at the temples in a way that looked intentional, the kind of distinguished erosion that money somehow always managed to make elegant. His suit was charcoal and bespoke and worth 3 months of a schoolteacher's salary. He ate slowly, methodically, the way he did everything, with the deliberate calm of a man who had long ago stopped worrying about whether anyone was watching, because everyone always was. Across from him, Yuri Seo laughed. She had the kind of laugh that filled a room without effort, bright and unguarded, and perfectly calibrated to make the person she was laughing with feel like the most interesting man alive. She was 34, the daughter of a shipping magnate who'd died leaving her a fortune large enough to fund a small country's infrastructure, and she moved through Seoul's upper circles with the practiced ease of someone who had never once been made to feel like she didn't belong. Her hand crossed the table. It rested on Jae-hyun's. He didn't pull away. That was the thing. He didn't pull away, and he didn't lean in either. He simply allowed it, the way powerful men allow certain things, with a kind of passive complicity that they'll later call meaningless, because to them, in that moment, it was. Just dinner, just a woman laughing, just a hand on a hand. 2 kilometers away, in a residential district where the streets were quieter and the trees were old enough to have seen a different city entirely, a 6-year-old boy named Malik Kwan was explaining to his mother with complete sincerity that dinosaurs probably would have been very good at soccer if they'd had the right shoes. Nia was standing at the stove. She was 37, tall and naturally graceful in a way she'd never been fully comfortable with, wearing a sweater that was 2 sizes too big and had a small paint stain on the left sleeve from a school project Malik had ambushed her with 3 weekends ago. Her hair was pulled back. She wasn't wearing makeup. She was, in the way that mattered most, entirely herself, which was a version of herself that the marble and glass world Jae-hyun inhabited would have struggled to categorize. Brachiosaurus, Malik said, very seriously, drawing something on his sketchpad that may or may not have been a dinosaur wearing cleats. He would be the goalkeeper because he's tall. Smart pick, Nia said. T-Rex would be striker, but he'd foul people too much. Also smart. She stirred the pot. The rain was loud against the kitchen window. She'd left the back porch light on because Jae-hyun had texted at 7 to say he was finishing a business dinner and would be home by 10, maybe 10:30. Don't wait up. She'd read the message, responded with a thumbs up, and felt something she'd stopped naming settle back into the familiar groove where it lived these days, somewhere between resignation and patience, somewhere she no longer examined too closely. The phone on the counter lit up. Unknown number. No name, no preamble, just an image. She almost didn't open it. She'd been getting spam lately. Fraudulent bank alerts, delivery notifications for packages she hadn't ordered. She almost swiped it away. She didn't. The photograph was taken from above. The angle of someone at a nearby table or a discreet position at the restaurant's edge. The lighting was warm and intimate. Two people at a candlelit table, the woman's hand resting over the man's, both of them leaning slightly inward, sharing something private. Jae-hyun's profile was unmistakable. Nia stood at the stove and looked at the photograph for 11 seconds. The rice was still warm. Malik was still explaining his dinosaur soccer team. The rain was still loud against the glass. Everything was exactly where it had been 11 seconds ago, and nothing was the same. She set the phone face down on the counter. "Mom, are you listening? I said T-Rex would foul people." "I heard you, baby." "Do you think dinosaurs would have liked rain?" "I think some of them probably didn't mind." She served the rice. She served his vegetables. She sat across from him at the table they'd bought together at a market in Itaewon 3 years ago. The one with the slight wobble on the left leg that Jae-hyun had promised 4 separate times to fix. She watched her son eat and asked him about his day and laughed in the right places and did not once look at the phone lying face down on the counter 6 feet away. After dinner, she bathed him. She read him 2 chapters of the book they were working through together, something about a rabbit who kept getting lost and finding his way home, which in different circumstances might have struck her as thematically significant. She sat beside him until his breathing slowed and deepened. Then she sat a little longer, listening to him sleep, which she had done since he was 3 days old, and which never, not once, had stopped feeling like the only thing in the world that made complete sense. Then she went to the living room and sat in the chair by the window and picked up her phone. She looked at the photograph again. Longer this time. She was not a woman who fell apart easily. She had grown up the daughter of a woman who worked 2 jobs and called it Tuesday, in a city that did not coddle softness, and she had learned early that feelings were real and important and needed to be processed somewhere private, somewhere they couldn't be used against you. She did not cry in front of people. She did not make scenes. She solved problems methodically, and she grieved quietly, and she had always, even as a small child, understood that the space between what you feel and what you show was a space you could control. She sat in the chair by the window for 47 minutes. She made decisions. Then she got up. The suitcase was in the hallway closet, a large navy one they'd used for a trip to Jeju 2 summers ago, one of the last real trips before things got complicated, before Jae-hyun's schedule became a wall she stopped trying to climb. She pulled it out quietly, unzipped it in the bedroom with the door mostly closed, and began to move through the room with a systematic efficiency that would have frightened anyone watching. Not everything, not even most things. What she took was specific. Her documents, Malik's documents, the external hard drive from the desk drawer that contained 3 years of financial records and 2 years of work she'd done quietly and privately, and which Jae-hyun had never asked about and she had never offered. Her grandmother's ring. Malik's sketch pads, all 6 of them, because she would not leave his drawings behind. His medication for the seasonal allergies. The stuffed elephant he'd had since he was 18 months old, and which he would not sleep without, which she'd learned during one terrible trip to Busan when she'd forgotten it and spent 2 hours talking him down. She packed efficiently. She moved to his room and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe, and then she went in and began transferring his things into a smaller bag with the same quiet efficiency. And she told herself later, many times, that she did not hesitate. She may have hesitated. She woke him at midnight. "Buddy?" She kept her voice soft, level, the voice she used when she needed him to cooperate without panicking. "We're going on an adventure." Malik blinked at her from beneath the covers, sleep-blurred and confused. "Now?" "Right now. I need you to be brave for me, okay? Like Brachiosaurus." He considered this with the gravity of a 6-year-old being asked something important. Then he nodded, sat up, and reached for the elephant on his pillow. At 12:23 a.m., Nia carried 1 suitcase and 1 small bag and held her son's hand and walked out of the apartment that had been her home for 4 years. She did not slam the door. She closed it with the same careful click she used every night, the kind of click that wouldn't wake a sleeping child. She left a letter on the kitchen counter next to the phone she was leaving behind. 6 words. She'd written them in under a minute because she'd known exactly what she needed to say. "Don't look for us again." The rain was still falling. They walked to the corner and hailed a cab. And when the driver asked where they were going, Nia gave him an address in a part of the city she'd scouted 3 months ago, just in case, because she was the kind of woman who planned for contingencies even when she hoped she'd never need them. And the cab pulled away from the curb, and the building disappeared behind them, and Malik fell asleep against her shoulder somewhere around the second intersection, the elephant tucked under his arm. And Nia looked out at the wet, dark city moving past the window and felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. Something more complicated than relief. Something that was partly grief and partly rage, and partly the terrifying, vertigo-inducing awareness that she had just walked off the edge of a life she'd spent 7 years building, and that the fall had already started, and that she would have to decide very quickly what she was going to do when she hit the bottom. She had already decided. She'd decided in that chair by the window over 47 minutes, with the photograph still open on her phone. She'd decided not just where she was going, but what she was going to build when she got there, because Nia Brooks Kwan, Nia Brooks, she was already thinking of herself as Nia Brooks again, quietly, the way you try a word in your mouth before you say it aloud, had not spent the last 7 years doing nothing. She had been quiet. She had been patient. She had been, by most external measures, a wife and a mother and a companion to a powerful man. And in the margins of that life, in the early mornings before Malik woke and the late nights after Jae-hyun came home from whatever city he'd been in, she had been building something else. Something that was entirely hers. Something no photograph could touch. Jae-hyun's car pulled into the underground garage at 11:58 p.m. He rode the elevator up with the particular emptiness of a man whose dinner had run long and who was calculating the minimum amount of social grace required to get himself from the door to the bedroom without conversation. He was not cruel, he was simply absent. He had been absent for years in ways he didn't have the vocabulary to describe, and Nia had learned to stop pointing at the absence and asking him to name it, because he couldn't, and the asking only made him defensive, and they had settled into the exhausted détente of a marriage that was technically intact. He opened the apartment door. Silence. He stood in the entryway for a moment. This wasn't unusual. She went to bed early. Malik went to bed early. There was nothing strange about a dark and quiet apartment at midnight. He set his keys on the hook. He shrugged off his jacket. He noticed the light on in the kitchen and walked in to get a glass of water and stopped. The letter was on the counter. He knew before he picked it up. He didn't know how he knew. Some animal thing, some disturbance in the specific texture of silence that lived in a home versus the silence that lived in an empty room. He picked it up and read 6 words and stood very still. He went to the bedroom. Her side of the closet was mostly full. She'd taken enough to survive, not enough to stage a production. That told him something about her state of mind that was more frightening than if she'd stripped the room bare. He went to Malik's room. The stuffed elephant was gone. He stood in the doorway of his son's empty room for a long time. The small bed with its dinosaur print sheets, the drawings tacked to the wall. Malik drew constantly, covered every surface he was allowed to cover. The walls were papered with creatures and vehicles and incomprehensible abstract shapes that Nia said were houses, and Jae-hyun had always nodded at without looking closely enough. He looked now. A green dinosaur with enormous legs, a blue car with too many wheels, a drawing of 3 people, stick figures, roughly, one tall and dark-haired, one tall with a cloud of hair around her head, one small between them, labeled in Malik's unsteady hand, Appa, Mama, Me. Jae-hyun Kwan, who had faced down rival syndicate leaders and corrupt government ministers and men who had pointed weapons at him in dark rooms, stood in his son's doorway and felt something move through him that he did not have the infrastructure to process. He called her number. The phone rang from somewhere in the apartment. He followed the sound to the kitchen counter. Her phone, face up, screen lighting with his call. She'd left it behind. He stood holding his own phone while hers rang 6 inches away, and then voicemail picked up, and he heard her voice, calm, professional, the version she used for the world, asking him to leave a message, and he stood there and could not think of a single thing to say. He didn't sleep. By 4 a.m., he had made 7 calls to people who owed him things. A surveillance expert, 2 private investigators with access to citywide camera networks. A man who handled sensitive information retrieval in ways that didn't require paperwork. By 6 a.m., the first reports were coming back. Camera footage from the block, cab company records, the building's own security log, which told him she'd left at 12:23 with 2 bags and a child. By 7 a.m., he had 12 people working the problem. By noon, he had 40. He sat in the office of his Gangnam headquarters, the legitimate face of his empire, a corporate tower that housed 3 separate holding companies, a private equity firm, and a consulting operation that existed to provide cover for things that didn't get written in annual reports. And he listened to his investigators give him their first update, and his jaw was tight and his eyes were flat, and the people in that room, people who had worked for him for years, looked at him and understood that this was a different category of emergency. He'd ordered searches before. He'd deployed resources before. He had the kind of organizational reach that governments spent budgets trying to replicate. Private security teams combing hotel registries, facial recognition queries running against bus station and subway surveillance archives. A 24-hour monitoring operation on every airport within a 3-hour radius. Nothing. She was there, and then she wasn't. And the city had swallowed her so completely that his people, who prided themselves on finding things that did not want to be found, kept returning to him with the same look on their faces. Empty hands. In a district she had chosen carefully, in a building with no lobby cameras and a landlord who'd signed a lease under a shell company she'd established 2 years prior, because Nia Brooks had not spent 7 years being the wife of a man who ran a criminal empire without learning something about the importance of contingency planning. She was making coffee in a small apartment while Malik slept in a room she'd furnished last month in preparation for this possibility. She stood at the window and looked out at a street she didn't know yet and felt the particular texture of a new beginning, which was not comfortable. New beginnings were not comfortable. They were disorienting and frightening and required you to stand in unfamiliar silence and decide whether the fear meant you'd made the wrong choice or simply that you'd made a real one. She drank her coffee. Then she opened her laptop. The investment firm had been registered under her maiden name, operating out of a small office in Mapogu that she visited twice a week under circumstances she'd never felt the need to explain to Jae-hyun, partly because he never asked. He assumed she was doing charity work. He assumed she was lunching with other wives. He assumed, in the comfortable, self-reinforcing way of powerful men, that the periphery of his life was decorative rather than structural. And she had never corrected him because his assumption was her protection. The firm was small, was real. In 3 years of quiet operation, she had cultivated 6 investors, careful, patient people who cared more about track record than splash, and posted returns that she could defend in any room. It was the thing she'd built in the margins. It was the thing no photograph could touch. She was going to grow it now. She was going to grow it the way things grow when they stop being secret, which is fast and sometimes violent and always, always irreversible. On the 3rd day of the search, Jae-hyun sat across from his chief investigator, a former intelligence officer named Pak, who had a face like weathered concrete and a manner to match, and listened to the man tell him that they had a strong lead in the Mapo district. She was seen at a coffee shop 2 days ago, Pak said. He kept his voice flat and professional, which Jae-hyun appreciated. Sentiment would not help anyone right now. The child was with her. They appear healthy. She's moving on foot, using cash. No phone activity on any registered device. She left her phone. Yes. She has either purchased a burner or is operating without one entirely. Given her profile, probably the former. Jae-hyun was quiet. Do you want us to move on it? Pak asked. The question hung in the room. Jae-hyun looked at the photograph on Pak's tablet. Security camera still, grainy and impersonal, a woman and a child crossing a street in the gray morning light. Even at that resolution, even from that angle, he could see the way she moved, deliberate, forward-facing, not looking back. She never looked back. That was something he'd always known about her and had, in the way of a man who takes for granted what he cannot afford to lose, never fully appreciated. Keep monitoring, he'd said. Don't approach. Pak's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Sir, I said keep monitoring. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was the thing about Jae-hyun Kwan's anger. It didn't announce itself. It settled, quiet and absolute, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. She left because she wanted distance. If your people move on her, she disappears again, and next time she won't make mistakes. With respect, she hasn't made any mistakes yet. No, Jae-hyun said. She hasn't. He looked at the photograph one more time. Pull the footage from the Mapo location. I want to know where she's operating out of. But no contact, not yet. He drove to the apartment that night. He still had the keys, and he wasn't sure what he expected. Absolution, maybe. Or some version of the conversation that hadn't happened yet. The one where he explained himself, and she listened, and he found the words that made it make sense. He'd been rehearsing fragments of it in the back of cars and the corners of meetings, which was not a place he was accustomed to living, in the emotional backcountry of his own head, constructing explanations for things he wasn't sure he understood himself. He walked through his apartment. He stood in Malik's room again. He sat on the small bed with the dinosaur print sheets and looked at the drawings on the wall. He picked up the phone she'd left. The battery was dead. He found a charger. She'd left that too, which meant she'd planned it, which meant she'd thought about this, about him finding everything exactly as she'd arranged it, which meant he charged the phone. When it came back on, he went to the messages. He found the unknown number. He opened the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. He was a man who understood power. He understood it structurally, mechanically, the way you understand a machine you've spent your life operating. He understood leverage and exposure and the calculus of information, who had it, who wanted it, who was willing to pay for it or weaponize it, or both. He had, over the course of building what he'd built, encountered every variety of threat and manipulation that the criminal and political underworlds could generate. He had never thought about his marriage as a target. He looked at the photograph, the angle, the framing, the way it had been sent, not to him, not to the press, not to a rival. To her. Specifically, surgically, to the one person whose response would cause the maximum damage. Someone had known she would leave, someone had counted on it. The realization moved through him slowly at first, then with accelerating certainty. This was not a paparazzi shot. This was not a jealous whisper or a piece of collateral gossip. This was constructed. This was aimed. He sat on his son's bed in his son's empty room, holding his wife's dead phone, and understood that somewhere in the architecture of his life, someone had identified the thing he hadn't known he could lose and had taken it. He stood up. The calm that settled over him now was different from his usual calm. His usual calm was the absence of reaction, the professional stillness of a man who'd learned that emotion was expensive. This was something else. This was the calm of a man who had located the coordinates of a problem and was already calculating the route. He made one call. "I need you to trace an origin," he said. "Unknown number, photo message, 48 hours ago." He read the number from the screen. "Don't sleep until you have something." He left the apartment. He did not take the elevator. He walked down 44 flights of stairs in the dark, the way he used to do when he was 22 and building everything from nothing, walking streets at 3 a.m. because movement was the only thing that kept the fear from settling. His footsteps echoed in the stairwell, and the sound followed him down. And when he pushed through the door at the bottom and the rain hit his face, he stopped and stood in it for a moment. Malik would be asleep somewhere in this city right now. Nia would be awake. She was always awake when she was working through something. He knew that about her. He knew the way she processed. Long silences, then sudden, devastating clarity, then action. He knew she had already moved past the crying, if there had been any, had already moved past the shaking, had already arrived at the cold, focused place she went when she'd made a decision. He'd always admired that about her. He'd always taken it for granted, too, the way you take for granted any constant in your life until it moves. He walked to his car. He sat behind the wheel for a moment in the underground garage, the rain audible as a low roar above him, the concrete pillars thick and gray in the fluorescent light. He thought about 11 years, because it was 11 years since the night they met, and 7 since they married, and 6 since Malik arrived and made everything simultaneously more complicated and more necessary. He thought about the apartment in Itaewon where they'd lived at first, the one with the thin walls where he couldn't make phone calls after 10 p.m. without waking her. He thought about the wobble in the kitchen table leg he still hadn't fixed. He thought about 6 words on a letter. He started the car. There was a trace running on an unknown number. There was a surveillance operation covering an entire district. There was a machine he'd built over 15 years grinding away in every direction, and somewhere in the gears of all that machinery was the answer to who had done this and why. And when he found out, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His investigator. 3 words in a text message. Got a name. Jae-hyun Kwan sat in the underground garage in the rain-muffled dark and looked at three words, and something that was not quite yet rage and not quite yet grief settled in his chest like a stone. He put the car in drive. He didn't know yet what the name would be. He didn't know yet the full shape of what had been done to him, to his family, to the life he'd built and neglected and now desperately wanted back. He didn't know yet that the photograph was only the surface, that beneath it ran something deeper and more deliberate, a plan constructed not just to wound him, but to hollow him out from the inside. He didn't know yet, but he was driving toward it. And somewhere across this city, in an apartment with no lobby cameras, Nia Brooks opened a new business document on her laptop, typed a name at the top of a fresh page, her company's name, her name, and began to write the first chapter of something that belonged entirely to her. Neither of them slept that night. The rain kept falling. The city held its breath. The name on the investigator's text was Yuri Seo. Jae-hyun sat with that for exactly 3 seconds. Then he typed back, "Everything. By morning." He put the car in drive and pulled out of the garage and into the rain-slicked street and drove without a destination because he needed the motion, needed the city moving past him in streaks of wet light, while the machine in his head ran its calculations. Yuri Seo. He'd known her 4 months. She'd entered his orbit the way certain people did. Not aggressively, not with obvious intent, but through the patient accumulation of presence. A mutual introduction at a gallery opening. A subsequent encounter at a business dinner he hadn't arranged. A third meeting that felt like coincidence until, sitting now in a car in the rain with her name on his phone screen, it didn't feel like coincidence at all. He pressed his thumb against the steering wheel. He thought about the dinner, the candlelight, her hand on his, how perfectly casual it had all seemed, how exactly right the atmosphere had been for a photograph. He thought about angles, about the distance from the nearest table, about a camera that had to have been positioned before they sat down. Someone had set the table before they arrived. He drove. By the time he got back to his Gangnam office, it was past 2 in the morning, and Pak was waiting for him in the lobby with the look of a man who'd been briefed on something and wasn't sure how his employer would receive it. "Talk," Jae-hyun said, walking past him toward the elevator. Pak followed. The number traces to a prepaid device registered to a logistics company in Incheon, Shell, but the device used the same cell tower as Yuri Seo's primary phone on the night the message was sent. Same tower, 40-second window. She sent it herself. Or had someone sent it from within 40 meters of her location? The elevator opened. They stepped in. Jae-hyun faced forward, watching the floor numbers climb. "What else?" he said. "We pulled her financials, the surface layer. What's publicly accessible? 3 months ago, she liquidated a significant position in a real estate fund, moved it into cash. 3 weeks later, the photography equipment was purchased, professional grade, low light capable, through a company registered to her assistant's cousin. So she planned it. The timeline suggests at least 8 weeks of preparation." The elevator stopped. They stepped into the corridor. Jae-hyun walked to his office, pushed the door open, didn't bother with the overhead lights. The city came through the floor-to-ceiling glass like a second illumination, all orange-gray and rain-blurred, and he stood at the window with his hands in his pockets and his reflection watching him. "Why?" he said. Not a question exactly, a word he was placing in the room to see what it landed on. Pak stood near the door. "The working theory." "I didn't ask for the working theory. I asked why." He turned. "You've been doing this 30 years. You've watched people do things. Why does a woman spend 8 weeks engineering the destruction of someone else's marriage?" Pak was quiet for a moment. "Because she wants what's on the other side of it." Jae-hyun looked at him. "She didn't want to embarrass you," Pak said. "She wanted your wife gone. Those are different objectives." The room held that for a moment. "Get deeper into her financials," Jae-hyun said. "Not the surface. Everything. And I want to know who she talks to, her full network, business, personal, anyone she's met with more than twice in the last 6 months. That will take time." "Then stop standing here." Pak left. Jae-hyun turned back to the window. Below, the Han River was a dark ribbon through the city, invisible in the rain except where bridge lights caught its surface. He thought about Naya. He thought about the systematic, unhurried efficiency with which she'd packed and left. Not rage, not impulse, but decision. The difference mattered. Rage you could negotiate with. Decision was a wall. He picked up his phone. He almost called her before he remembered she had no phone to call. He stared at the screen for a moment, at the contact that still read Nia. Home. And put the phone in his pocket. He sat down. For the first time in 15 years, Jae Hyun Kwan didn't know what his next move was. And the unfamiliarity of that sat in his chest like something foreign, like a splinter he couldn't locate. He sat in the dark office with the city glowing below him and waited for morning. Across the district, Nia was not sleeping either. She was at the kitchen table in the small apartment with 3 documents open on her laptop and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The apartment was quiet. Malik was out hard, the deep, boneless sleep of small children who trust completely that the world will still be there when they wake up. And she was grateful for that trust, even as she understood she was now solely responsible for maintaining it. The documents were financial projections. She had a meeting in 4 days with a potential investor, someone she'd been cultivating carefully for 6 months, a woman named Song, who ran a mid-sized tech company and had been cautiously watching Nia's fund performance with the particular attention of someone who was almost convinced. The meeting had been scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Nia had moved it up. She wasn't going to wait anymore. That was the thing she kept returning to, the thought that surfaced every time the grief tried to pull her sideways. She had spent 7 years in some version of waiting for Jae Hyun to come home, waiting for the schedule to open up, waiting for the right moment to tell him about the firm, to show him the thing she'd built, to be seen as something other than the backdrop of his life. She had been patient in the way that women are encouraged to be patient, which is to say, in the way that slowly erodes you from the inside while maintaining a perfectly intact exterior. She was done waiting. She highlighted a column of numbers and recalculated. The projection shifted. She looked at it, made a note, closed the laptop. She went to check on Malik. He was sleeping on his stomach with the elephant tucked under one arm, his face turned to the side, mouth slightly open. She stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked exactly like Jae Hyun when he slept. The same angle of jaw, the same slight furrow even in unconsciousness, the same quality of stillness that felt less like rest and more like temporary suspension. It was the thing she'd noticed first about Jae Hyun, a long time ago. The way he was still. Not peaceful. Still. Like something that was always, at some level, alert. Malik had inherited it. She used to find it beautiful. She pulled the door mostly closed and went to bed. She lay on her back in the dark for a while, not trying to sleep, just letting the day settle. The city outside made the sounds cities made at 3 a.m. Distant traffic, an occasional voice. The low continuous hum of electricity and infrastructure that never fully stopped. It was different from the residential quiet of the apartment she'd left. More alive. Less curated. She thought about the photograph. She'd been trying not to think about the photograph, which was the same as trying not to think about a stone in your shoe. The deliberate avoidance of it just made you more aware of where it was. She thought about it clinically, the way she'd trained herself to think about problems. The angle, the timing, the anonymous number. The fact that it had arrived at exactly the moment Jae Hyun was unreachable. Business dinner, private line, the subtle infrastructure of plausible deniability. She'd been doing this since the morning after, taking the image apart the way you'd take apart a mechanism, looking for the working parts. Someone had sent it on purpose. She'd known that within 24 hours of leaving, not because she was paranoid, but because she was analytical, and the analysis didn't support accident. Accidents were imprecise. This was precise. The timing, the angle, the delivery, all of it had been designed to land a specific way. She didn't know yet what to do with that. She filed it in the part of her mind where she kept things she wasn't ready to use and closed her eyes. She slept for 4 hours. It was enough. The first time Jae Hyun saw Yuri Seo after the night he'd learned her name, he arranged it carefully. He called her himself. This was unusual. They'd communicated through intermediaries mostly, or at events, the informal ecosystem of people who moved in the same circles without formal connection. He called her on a Thursday morning and said he'd like to have coffee. There was a matter he wanted to discuss, not urgent, a professional conversation. She said yes immediately. Of course she did. They met at a hotel cafe in Gangnam, neutral ground, public enough that nothing could be misread, private enough for a real conversation. She arrived 3 minutes early, which told him she was eager. She was wearing something that had been chosen carefully, not casual enough to suggest she hadn't tried, not formal enough to suggest she'd tried too hard. She smiled when she saw him, that specific calibrated warmth he now examined like a document he was reading for the second time, looking for what he'd missed. He'd missed a lot. "You seem tired," she said when he sat down. "Busy week. I heard you've been—" She paused, selecting. "Managing some family matters." He looked at her. "Where'd you hear that?" She made a light gesture, the sole shorthand for everyone hears everything. "You know how this city is?" "I do," he said. He let a moment pass. He picked up his coffee. "Yuri, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer." Something shifted in her face. Barely. A recalibration happening somewhere behind the eyes. "Of course," she said. "The restaurant, 4 weeks ago." He set his cup down. "Who arranged the table next to us?" The silence was exactly 2 seconds long. He'd been counting. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said. "Yes, you are." She held his gaze. She was good at this. Better than most people he'd sat across from in contentious negotiations, better at maintaining a surface while the calculation ran underneath. He gave her credit for that even as he watched it happen. "Jae-hyun, don't." His voice was flat. Not angry. Flat. The way a road is flat. Endless. No cover. "I've spent 15 years in rooms with people who are lying to me. I know what it sounds like when someone is deciding what to admit to." A longer silence. She put down her own cup. When she looked up, something had shifted. Not confession, not quite, but a subtle abandonment of the performance. The warmth dialed down to something cooler and more honest. "I think you should be careful about what you're accusing me of," she said. "I'm not accusing you of anything yet. I'm asking a question. The question implies an accusation. Then answer it, and we'll see if the implication holds." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her assessing. How much did he know? How much was she in danger of? What was the cost-benefit of various responses? He'd watched that calculation run in 100 rooms. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said finally. "Technically, maybe not. Legally, definitely not." He leaned back slightly. "But I want you to understand something. My wife left. My son is gone. And the photograph that caused that came from a number that shared a cell tower with your phone." He watched her very carefully. "So we're past the part where I wonder. We're at the part where I decide what to do about what I know." Her jaw tightened fractionally. "You can't prove— I don't need to prove anything to anyone but you. Right now, in this room." He stood up. He was done with the coffee, done with the performance of a casual conversation. "I want to know one thing, just one. Did you do this alone?" She didn't answer. That was its own answer. He left her at the table. He walked through the hotel lobby with the controlled pace of a man who was not running but was very close to something. And when he got to the car, he sat in the driver's seat and called Pak. "She didn't act alone," he said. "We're pulling on some threads," Pak said. "There's money in her trail that doesn't connect to her own interests. A third-party source routed through a financial structure we've seen before." "Whose structure?" A pause. "We're not certain yet. But the architecture, the routing, the shell layers, it matches a pattern we've seen in transactions associated with the Sung network." Jae-hyun went very still. The Sung network. Min-jun Sung, a name he'd known for a decade as a rival, a competitor in the careful Cold War geometry of Seoul's organized power. They'd maintained distance, not peace. The understanding between them was the kind that didn't require documentation because everyone knew the cost of breaking it, or he'd thought everyone knew. "How confident," he said. 70%. Maybe more by tonight." "Keep working it." He ended the call. He sat in the parking garage and let the shape of it settle into his understanding. If Min-jun Sung had funded Yuri's operation, if the photograph wasn't just ambition, but a coordinated move, then this wasn't about a woman who wanted his attention. This was about someone who'd looked at his life and found the load-bearing wall and gone after it. Not his money, not his territory, his family. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. One of his Mapo surveillance team, the group he'd tasked with monitoring Nia's district without making contact. He answered, We've identified her office, the man said. Mapo-gu, third floor of a commercial building on Yanghua Road. The firm is registered under her maiden name, Brooks Asset Management. Jae-hyun closed his eyes briefly. Brooks Asset Management. He'd had no idea. He thought about all the mornings he'd left before she woke up. All the evenings he'd come home after Malik was already asleep. All the hours he'd spent in other countries, other cities, other rooms, building the empire that was going to provide for his family, which was the story he'd told himself so many times it had become true by repetition. He thought about how many of those hours she'd been sitting at a kitchen table with a laptop, building something she'd never shown him because he'd never asked to see it. He had never asked. That was the thing. That was the specific, ugly truth of it. He had provided money, security, a life with no material shortage, and he had told himself that provision was the language of love, and he had never asked her what language she spoke. "Sir," the surveillance operative said. "Keep the eyes on the building. Still no contact." He thought for a second. "What's the security setup? Light? Single entry point? Standard keycard? No visible private security? 2 exits. The building doesn't have external cameras. One over the main entrance. Mapo-gu municipal cameras cover the street, but they're the standard grid, nothing proprietary." Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment. Something was moving at the edge of his thinking. Not quite a thought yet, more like the shadow a thought throws before it arrives. "Has anyone else been watching the building?" he said. "Anyone who isn't our people?" A pause on the line. Rustling, the sound of someone checking. "There's a car," the operative said slowly. "Dark sedan. It's been parked on the cross street for the last 2 days. Doesn't match any of our registries." The shadow became a thought. If Minjun Sung had sent Yuri to destabilize his marriage, had counted on Nia leaving to create chaos in Jae-hyun's organization during the resulting emotional fallout. And if that plan was working, if Jae-hyun's operation had in fact been running at reduced capacity, while 40 of his people spent their time searching for a missing wife instead of managing a criminal empire, then Minjun wasn't done. Minjun was watching the board, and if Minjun's people had found Nia— "The car," Jae-hyun said. "Plates." The operative read them off. "Run them right now," Jae-hyun said. "Call me back in 2 minutes." He started driving. He didn't know if he was overreacting. He'd been accused of it before. The paranoid geometry of a mind trained to see threat in everything, to treat the world as a chessboard where every piece had an agenda. But paranoia had kept him alive in rooms where lesser men had been carried out, and the car that had been sitting on a cross street for 2 days outside his wife's office building was not, in the face of everything he now knew, something he was willing to dismiss. His phone buzzed. "Plates come back to a leasing company in Yongsan," the operative said. "The company is clean, but we checked the lessee. He's a known associate of Sung Network," Jae-hyun said. "Yes, sir." He pressed the accelerator. He called Pak at the same time. "I need 4 men at the Mapo building right now. Yanghua Road. 3rd floor. My wife and possibly my son are in that building, and there's a Sung associate sitting on the street outside." How quickly? "Now, Pak. Not in 20 minutes. Now." He was 30 minutes away. He drove like the 30 minutes mattered. And in the building on Yanghua Road, on the 3rd floor, Nia Brooks was in the middle of a phone call with the investor Song Mi-yeon, who had just said yes. Yes to the meeting, yes to the preliminary terms, yes in the cautious but real way of someone who had decided to commit. And Nia was making notes on a legal pad with the contained excitement of a woman who had wanted this for 3 years and was finally watching it arrive. She didn't see the car on the cross street. She didn't see the man in the dark sedan lower his phone and speak 2 words into it. She was writing numbers on a legal pad and feeling for the first time in months like the future was a country she might actually reach. Outside, on the street below, the dark sedan's engine turned. The engine turning over was a sound Nia didn't hear. She was on the 3rd floor with a legal pad and a pen, and Song Mi-yeon's voice in her ear saying the words she'd spent 3 years working toward, and the world outside the window was just the world. Wet streets, afternoon light, the ordinary machinery of a city going about its business. "I want to be transparent with you," Song said. She had a precise, careful way of speaking, each word placed deliberately, the verbal equivalent of someone who never signed anything without reading it. "I've watched your fund for 18 months. The returns are real. The methodology is sound. What I want to understand before we move forward is the ownership structure. Straightforward, Naya said. Single founder, no external board, no silent partners. What you see is what exists. And your personal situation won't complicate the firm's independence? I ask because... A brief pause. There's been some talk. Nia kept her voice even. My personal situation is being managed. It has no structural connection to the firm. The firm was established independently and is operated independently. That doesn't change. I appreciate the directness. It's the only thing I know how to offer. Song made a small sound that might have been approval. 4 days? My office, 2 o'clock. Bring the full prospectus. I'll be there. She hung up. She set the phone on the desk and pressed both palms flat against the legal pad and breathed. It was a real breath, the kind you take when something you've been holding for a long time finally lets go. Not dramatic, just full, the simple animal relief of a chest expanding without resistance. She allowed herself 10 seconds of that. Then she heard the sound from downstairs. It wasn't loud. It was the specific sound of something wrong happening quietly. A controlled disturbance, the kind of noise that happens when people are trying not to make noise, which was somehow more alarming than the alternative. A door. Footsteps with a certain quality of urgency. Then voices, low and fast, in the stairwell. Nia stood up. She moved to her office door and opened it 2 inches and listened. The building had 3 other tenants on the 3rd floor. A small architecture firm. A freelance translator. A man who ran some kind of import consulting operation and whom she'd exchanged 12 words with in 2 months. The hallway was empty. The voices were still in the stairwell and getting closer. She went back to her desk. She picked up her phone. She dialed the number of the building's front desk, a young man named Choi who manned the lobby and took in packages. It rang 8 times. No answer. She looked at her phone for a second, then opened the drawer on the left side of her desk and reached to the back where she kept, along with a backup phone charger and 3 months of filed receipts, a small canister of pepper spray she'd bought in the first week after leaving the apartment, and which she'd hoped, actively, to never use. She held it and stood beside the door and listened. The stairwell door opened. Footsteps in the hallway, 2 sets, maybe 3. They weren't the footsteps of someone who belonged here. She'd learned the rhythms of this floor, the architect's quick, light step, the translator's deliberate pace. These were careful footsteps, the kind that were trying to sound casual and failing. They stopped outside her office. A knock. 3 beats? Unhurried. She didn't answer. Ms. Brooks? The voice was male, accented, her name in his mouth with the slight emphasis of someone who'd been given it on a piece of paper. We'd like to speak with you briefly. She said nothing. We're associates of someone who wants to ensure your safety. Given recent events with your husband's organization, there are concerns. I'm calling the police, she said through the door, her voice entirely steady, which surprised even her. A short pause on the other side. Then a different sound, bottom, not the door handle, but something lower, harder, the sound of a decision being made. And she was already stepping back when the door came open. 2 men, both large, one in a dark jacket who moved with the controlled economy of someone trained, the other broader, staying at the doorframe. Neither of them was pointing anything at her, which she registered as the kind of detail that mattered and also the kind of detail that could change. Ms. Brooks, the first one said, this doesn't need to be difficult. You broke my door, she said. The handle was unlocked. He looked at her hands, at the pepper spray. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite amusement. That's not going to be useful. Tell me what you want. We'd like you to come with us, briefly. There's someone who wants to have a conversation. Who? He didn't answer that. I'm not going anywhere with you, she said. Ms. Brooks, where's my son? She said it before she'd fully decided to, the question arriving from somewhere below thought. Malik was at a neighborhood daycare 2 blocks away, the one she'd found in the first week, the one with the yellow door and the garden in the back, and the woman who ran it, and who had, in Nia's assessment, the non-negotiable solidity of someone you could trust with something precious. 2 blocks away. 2 blocks. The man with the dark jacket took a step forward. The second man appeared at the doorframe, and behind him, in the hallway, There was suddenly a third presence, a sound, a collision of motion. And then the second man went sideways into the wall with a controlled violence that was over before she'd fully processed it starting, and in the space where he'd been standing were two men she didn't recognize, moving with the practiced speed of people who'd done this before. Behind them, filling the doorframe, was Jae-hyun. He looked at her first. Just for a second, a single, comprehensive scan that took in her face, her posture, the pepper spray in her hand, the fact that she was standing and intact, and something in his expression shifted so briefly she almost missed it. Then he looked at the man in the dark jacket. "Hands," he said. The man assessed the room. He was good. You could see him doing it, running the math, exits and numbers and odds. Then he put his hands where they could be seen. Jae-hyun's people secured both men with efficiency. Jae-hyun stepped into the office and the room contracted around him, the way rooms did. Nia hadn't moved. He looked at her. She looked at him. 7 years of marriage and 4 weeks of absence sat between them in the silence like a third person in the room. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." "Malignant. Daycare, 2 blocks." He nodded. He took out his phone, made a call, spoke 3 sentences, ended it. "2 of my people are at the daycare now. He's fine." She held the pepper spray at her side. She was aware of holding it, aware of the slight absurdity of the gesture, aware of not wanting to put it down because putting it down felt like something she wasn't ready for. "You found me," she said. "Yes." "I told you not to. I know." He didn't apologize for it. She noted that. "I found you 4 days after you left. I've had people watching the building since then. No contact. I wasn't going to—" He stopped, started over. "I needed to know you were safe. That's different from interfering." "Is it?" "Nia, don't." She said it the way he'd said it to Yuri Seo in the cafe, flat and complete, a word that closed a door. "Don't say my name like that right now." He was quiet. She looked at the 2 men being managed by his people in the hallway. "Who are they?" "Associates of a man named Min-jun Sung." The name meant nothing to her, and everything to her simultaneously. Nothing because she'd never heard it, everything because the fact that Jae-hyun's world had found its way into her office on a Tuesday afternoon told her the name was going to matter. "Who is Min-jun Sung?" "A rival. Someone who's been watching my organization for an opening." He looked at the men in the hallway, then back at her. "The photograph, it wasn't—" He seemed to be selecting words with unusual care. "It wasn't what you thought it was." She looked at him steadily. "Explain that." "Yuri Seo. She was positioned by Sung. He funded her operation. The approach, the restaurant, the photograph, all of it. The goal was to destabilize my organization by removing you." She let the silence sit for a moment. "Removing me." His calculation was that if you left, I'd be compromised, distracted. It would create an opening for him to move against my operation. Nia looked at him for a long time. She thought about the photograph, the angle, the timing, the surgical delivery at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when dinner was on the stove and a 6-year-old was drawing dinosaurs. She thought about how she'd analyzed it in bed that first night, the clinical assessment of precision, the conclusion she'd reached and filed away. She'd been right. She'd been right that it was constructed and aimed, and somehow that was not a comfort. Somehow the confirmation that her marriage had been deliberately targeted, that she'd been used as a mechanism to wound someone else, was its own specific category of violation. She was not a person. She had been a pressure point. "So I was a strategy," she said. "You were a target, which is different." "Is it?" She heard her own voice coming from somewhere very cool and very far back in her chest. "Because from where I'm standing, I left my home and my life because someone needed me to, and you're here telling me that the photographs, the thing that ended our marriage, wasn't even real." "The photograph was real. The dinner was real. My hand." He said it without looking away. "I didn't stop her because I didn't think it mattered. That's what was real." She absorbed that. She'd expected deflection. She hadn't expected that. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'm not here to argue the marriage. I'm here because Sung's people found you, and that's not over yet." "What does he want with me now? I'm not your wife anymore. I'm not leverage." You are leverage as long as Malik exists, Jae-hyun said. And I have a son who is going to be at a daycare 2 blocks away every morning, and I need you to understand that the situation is not safe. The pepper spray was still in her hand. She set it on the desk. Tell me everything, she said. He did. He stood in her office, the space she'd built without him, the third floor she'd found and furnished and filled with the evidence of 3 years of work, and told her the shape of what he knew. Sung's network, the financial traces, Yuri's role, the strategy of using Nia's departure to create chaos, to bleed Jae-hyun's organization during a period of emotional distraction while Sung moved to absorb the exposed territory. He told her all of it. He owed her that. She listened without interrupting, which was how she always listened when the information was important, completely, giving it her full attention, storing it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the legal pad on her desk, the notes from the phone call that felt like it had happened in a different life 20 minutes ago. The men downstairs, she said. What were they going to do with me? Insurance. If I moved against Sung directly, you and Malik become a bargaining position. So he takes us. And you stop. That was the plan. And if you don't stop? Jae-hyun didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was in the kind of world she'd been living adjacent to for 7 years without ever being allowed to see it clearly. The world that had funded the apartment and the car and the life she'd mistaken for security. She looked at her desk, at the legal pad, at the prospectus she'd spent 6 weeks preparing for a meeting in 4 days that suddenly felt like it belonged to a different woman's life. What do you need from me? She said. He looked at her, a look she couldn't fully read, which was unusual. She'd spent 7 years learning his face, and she couldn't read this one. To relocate, somewhere secure, somewhere my people can cover the perimeter, until this is resolved. How long? Weeks. Maybe less. I have a meeting in 4 days. I know. I'm not canceling it. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking you to cancel it. I'm asking you to let me keep you and Malik safe while you go. She looked at him. He looked back. The room was quiet except for the sounds of his people in the hallway, the ordinary city noise coming through the window. This doesn't change anything, she said. Between us. This is not... What's happening right now is not a reconciliation. I know that. I'm cooperating because of Malik. I know that too. She picked up her phone. She picked up the legal pad. She looked around the office that was hers, her desk, her projections, her window, the plant in the corner she'd bought because it survived in low light, and felt the specific bitterness of having something taken from you, not by failure, but by someone else's calculation. Give me 10 minutes, she said. I'll pack what I need. He nodded and moved toward the door to give her the room. He was at the threshold when she spoke again. The dinner, she said, 4 weeks ago. If the photograph had never been sent, would you have told me? He stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. She watched his back, the set of his shoulders, the way he stood when something landed. He turned. No, he said. She nodded once, slowly, the nod of someone receiving information they'd already suspected but needed confirmed. 10 minutes, she said. He went out. The meeting with Sung happened 3 days later, and Jae-hyun didn't plan it. He'd been running the strategic calculation. How to move against the Sung network without exposing his own operation, how to assemble enough evidence to neutralize the threat through channels that wouldn't require a war, how to protect Nia and Malik while simultaneously dismantling the mechanism pointed at them. He'd been running that calculation for 72 hours, and he was close, and then Pak called at 7 a.m. and said Min Jun Sung had requested a meeting, not demanded. Requested. The word choice was deliberate. They met in a building in Yeouido that belonged to one of Sung's legitimate holding companies. Clean floors, glass walls, conference rooms that could have hosted an insurance company's quarterly review. Sung was 60, heavier than his reputation had led Jae-hyun to picture, with a quality of settled patience about him that you saw in men who had been playing long games for a long time and had learned to find the waiting tolerable. He had 2 people with him. Jae-hyun had Pak. They sat across a conference table. You recovered your wife, Sung said. No preamble. I respect efficiency. She's not a recovery. She's a person. Sung tilted his head slightly, as if this were an interesting philosophical position. I sent those men to ensure her safety, nothing more. Your men broke down her office door. A misunderstanding. I apologize for the method. Jae-hyun looked at him, the practiced calm of a man who had just apologized for a thing he'd ordered, with exactly the tone of someone who knew the apology was a formality. What do you want, Min-jun? A conversation. Sung folded his hands on the table. You've been running an investigation into my financial interests. You've interfered with an associate of mine, Ms. Seo. You've deployed surveillance in 4 districts. I want to understand your intentions. I think you understand my intentions. I'd like to hear them stated. You funded an operation to destroy my marriage, Jae-hyun said. You had a woman spend months positioning herself next to me so that a photograph could be sent to my wife at a precise moment. You stationed people outside my wife's business. He paused. I'm going to dismantle every financial structure you have that touches my territory. That's my intention. Sung's expression didn't change. Bold. Accurate. Jae-hyun. He leaned forward slightly. I've been operating in this city for 30 years. You've been operating for 15. I have relationships with people who were deciding things before you were relevant. What you're describing, this dismantling, is a very expensive ambition for a man whose organization has spent the last 4 weeks chasing a missing family instead of managing its interests. My organization has been fine. Has it? Sung smiled, and it was the smile of a man turning over a card. I've acquired 3 of your partner agreements in the last 2 weeks. Quietly. The partners didn't tell you because they assumed you knew or because they assumed you didn't care. Either way, he spread his hands. The ground has been moving while you were looking the other way. Jae-hyun held very still. Check with your operations director when you leave, Sung said. You'll find I'm not exaggerating. The room was quiet. 3 partner agreements. If Sung was telling the truth, and the specific confidence with which he'd said it, the patience of it, the invitation to verify, all suggested he was. Then the organization had been bleeding quietly, while the search for Nia consumed Hae-hyun's attention and his people's resources. 3 agreements meant 3 revenue streams, 3 relationships that would take months to rebuild, 3 footholds in territory that was now contested. This was what the plan had been. Not just the photograph, not just Nia, all of it together. The emotional disruption, the resource drain, the quiet accumulation while the mark was looking elsewhere. He'd walked into it with his eyes open and hadn't seen it. What do you want? Jae-hyun said. To talk. Sung leaned back. Like reasonable men, I don't want a war. Wars are expensive and I'm 60 years old and I find them tedious. What I want is an acknowledgement that the geography has changed. And if I don't acknowledge it, Sung was quiet for a moment. Then we'll have a different conversation, one that involves the photographs I have of your wife's business activities during the period she was officially a dependent on your tax filings. Independent operation, undisclosed income. It's not criminal, but the tax authorities might find the discrepancy interesting. He paused. Or there's a conversation that involves your son's school, the one in Mapo. The schedule is very regular. Jae-hyun looked at him across the conference table. Sung looked back with the settled patience of a man who had placed his pieces carefully and was waiting for the other player to count them. 3 partner agreements gone. Evidence assembled against Nia. A threat pointed at his son. Jae-hyun felt something shift in him. Not rage, not fear. Something below both of those. A tectonic thing, a fundamental rearrangement of what he was willing to do and what he was willing to. Jae-hyun looked at Sung across the conference table and felt something become very simple. That was the thing about reaching a certain threshold. The calculus stopped being complicated. All the variables, the weighing of options, the careful geometry of a man who'd spent 15 years thinking 3 moves ahead, it all collapsed into something with no moving parts. Not rage. Rage was loud and imprecise. This was quieter than rage. This was the specific clarity of a man who had just identified the last thing he would tolerate and found himself already on the other side of it. He stood up. Sung watched him with the mild attention of a man who believed he held every card. I'll be in touch, Jae-hyun said. He walked out. In the elevator, Park stood beside him and said nothing, which was one of the things Jae-hyun valued most about him. The elevator descended, The lobby opened. They walked to the car and got in, and Pak drove 2 blocks before pulling into a parking structure and stopping because Jae-hyun needed to think, and cars in motion made thinking linear. "The 3 agreements," Jae-hyun said. "I already made the calls while you were in the meeting." Pak kept his hands on the wheel. 2 confirmed. The third, a pause. "The third is more complicated." "How complicated?" "Chairman O's team says it was a business decision, market conditions." "Chairman O has been my partner for 9 years. "Yes." Jae-hyun looked at the concrete wall of the parking structure. The fluorescent light above them buzzed with a slight irregularity, a half-second pulse that his brain tracked automatically, even while the rest of him was elsewhere. "Sung moved faster than I thought," he said. "He had a 4-week head start while we were searching." "I know." He pressed his thumb against his knee. "Call O directly, not his team, him. Tell him I want to meet tonight. And if he declines, then I know where we stand." He turned. "The evidence Sung has on Nia's business activities. He assembled that in 4 weeks, which means he was compiling it before she left, which means he had surveillance on her before the photograph was sent. He knew about the firm before I did." Pak was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant resource investment for a contingency." "It's not a contingency, it's the whole plan. The photograph was first strike. The partner agreements were the second. The threat against her firm, against Malik, that's the third. He's been running a sequence and we've been responding to each piece individually without seeing the whole." He picked up his phone. He called Nia. She picked up on the second ring. She was at the Safe House, one of his properties in Seodamungu, a residential building that didn't connect to any of his registered holdings, where she'd been for 3 days with Malik and 2 of Jae-hyun's most trusted people on the door. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to not make decisions about it until I've finished talking." A short silence. "Go ahead." He told her about Sung's meeting, the partner agreements, the tax exposure, Malik's school. He told her all of it with the same flat efficiency he'd used in her office, because she'd asked for the truth the first time and had held it without flinching, and he understood now that the version of Nia he'd been protecting her from all these years, from the ugliness, the exposure, the real shape of the world he moved in, had been a fiction he'd constructed for his own comfort rather than hers. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "What's your plan?" she said. "I'm going to take him apart, but it's going to move fast and it's going to be loud, and I need you and Malik somewhere he can't reach." "How loud?" "Loud enough that the tax exposure won't matter because Sung won't be in a position to deploy it." Another pause. "You're going to burn the whole thing down." "I'm going to burn his thing down." "And yours?" He didn't answer immediately. She took the silence for what it was. "Jae-hyun." Her voice had shifted slightly, not softer, just different, the register she used when she was being precise about something important. "If you go at him the way I think you're planning to go at him, you don't walk away from this cleanly. Your operation takes the same exposure his does." "I know." "So what comes after?" "I don't know yet." She absorbed that. "Malik is fine," she said finally. "He's drawing. He's been drawing the whole time. He asked me this morning if we were on an adventure, and I said yes, and he said good. Adventures are better than regular days." Something moved through Jae-hyun's chest that he didn't try to identify. "Keep him drawing," he said. He ended the call. Pak had been looking forward through the windshield the whole time, giving him the privacy of pretending not to hear. Now he turned. "What do you need?" Pak said. "Everything we have on Sung's operation. The financial traces, the shell companies, the partner agreements he used to pull O and the others, every connection point." He looked at Pak directly. "And I need to know who in Sung's organization has been wanting out. There's always someone who's been wanting out." Pak nodded once. "Lee Dong-woo, Sung's logistics coordinator. He's been managing the money movement for 8 years. Word about 6 months ago was he wanted to negotiate a separation, and Sung made it clear separation wasn't an option. Find him. He won't be easy to approach. Tonight, Pak." They drove. Lee Dong-woo was found in a restaurant in Sinchon at 9 in the evening, a man in his late 40s with the careful, watchful eyes of someone who had spent years knowing things he couldn't say. He looked up when Jae-hyun sat across from him uninvited, and his face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: alarm, calculation, and then a very deliberate stillness that was its own kind of answer. "I know who you are," Lee said. "Then this is efficient." Jae-hyun set a phone on the table. On the screen was a financial document, one of Pak's extractions, 3 layers deep into Sung's routing structure. "I want to confirm these figures are accurate." Lee looked at the screen. His jaw worked slightly. "Where did you get this? Is it accurate?" A long pause. Lee picked up his chopsticks, set them down. "What do you want?" "Testimony, documented, submitted to the Financial Crimes Investigation Division through a third-party attorney." He slid a card across the table. "That attorney. She'll handle the filing. Your name gets protections that I'll fund personally. Sung will be managing his own problems. He won't have the bandwidth for you." Lee looked at the card. He looked at the document on the phone. Jae-hyun watched him doing the math. The same math Lee had probably been doing for 6 months, running the odds on a situation he'd been trapped in, looking for the door. "Give me 48 hours, Lee said. "You have 24. He left the restaurant. The next 16 hours moved at a speed that Jae-hyun's body registered as physical, a continuous low-level pressure behind his sternum, the kind that accompanied the final stages of an operation that had been building for weeks. He slept 3 hours. He ate once, standing in the Seodaemun safe house kitchen at 2 in the morning while the building was quiet, eating cold rice directly from the container because there was no time for anything requiring heat. Malik found him there. The small boy appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, the elephant tucked under one arm, blinking in the light with the disoriented gravity of a child who has woken in an unfamiliar place and is working out whether to be worried. He looked at his father. "Appa," he said. Jae-hyun set down the rice container. He crouched down to Malik's level. Up close, his son's face had the specific weight of sleep, heavy-lidded, soft, not fully in the world yet. "Why are you up?" Jae-hyun said. "I heard a sound." Malik looked around the kitchen with the systematic attention of a 6-year-old cataloging an unfamiliar space. "This house is different." "Yes." "Are we still on the adventure?" "Yes." "Go back to sleep." Malik considered this with the seriousness he applied to most things. Then he looked at Jae-hyun with an expression that was, in its unfiltered directness, the most clarifying thing Jae-hyun had seen in weeks. "Are you going to fix it?" he said. Jae-hyun looked at his son. "Yes," he said. Malik nodded, apparently satisfied with this, and turned and padded back down the hallway. Jae-hyun heard the door to the small bedroom close softly. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and went back to work. Lee Dong-woo delivered at hour 19. The documentation came through the attorney in a package that was, according to Pak, more comprehensive than they'd hoped. Not just the financial routing, but records of specific communications, meeting transcripts that Lee had apparently been keeping privately for 18 months as his own insurance policy, and a detailed account of the operation against Jae-hyun's organization, including the funding of Yuri Seo and the orchestration of the photograph. Everything. Dated, sourced, corroborated. Jae-hyun read it at 5 in the morning in a chair by the window of the safe house. Outside, the city was in the specific gray-blue dark that preceded dawn, that colorless hour when everything looked like a sketch of itself. He read every page. He read it carefully, the way you read something that is going to change the shape of what comes next. When he finished, he called Pak. "File it," he said. "Financial crimes? And the organized crime division. Both, simultaneously. I want investigators at 2 separate agencies opening files at the same time so Sung can't contain either one by managing the other. That's going to come back on your operation too." "I know." A pause. "Jae-hyun, when you say you know, I know what I'm doing, Pak." The filings went in at 7 a.m. By 9, Jae-hyun had received confirmation that 2 investigative divisions had opened formal inquiries. By 10, one of Sung's attorneys had called Pak's number. Not Jae-hyun's. The call was clearly a probe, feeling for the shape of the damage. Pak didn't answer. By noon, the storm broke. It didn't come from the investigators. It came from inside Sung's organization. The particular cascade that happens when an entity built on controlled information suddenly has that information out of its control, when people who've been making calculations based on a stable landscape suddenly realize the landscape has moved. 3 of Sung's mid-level coordinators called in sick. 2 of his front companies had their banking access suspended pending inquiry. A commercial property deal he'd been closing for 6 months collapsed in an afternoon when the partnering firm quietly withdrew. Jae-hyun tracked it from the safe house, phone in hand, receiving updates in 15-minute intervals. Then at 2 in the afternoon, his primary security lead called from the Seodaemun building's street entrance. "We have a problem," the man said. Jae-hyun was already standing. "Talk." 3 vehicles, just parked on the adjacent street. We have eyes on 6 men, maybe more in the cars. They're not from any of our teams. Sung. Has to be. His mind ran the calculation in the time it took to exhale. The filings had gone in that morning. Sung knew by now, had to know, the cascade in his organization was evidence that he knew. This was a response, not legal, not procedural. Sung was sending a message the way men like him sent messages when the institutional options had been stripped away. He was coming for what he'd threatened in the conference room. "How long before they move?" Jae-hyun said. "Unknown. They're stationary right now. Could be waiting for something. Waiting for confirmation that I'm not here." He was already moving. "Where's Pak?" "En route. 8 minutes. I have 4 people in the building. 3 on the perimeter, 1 at the door. Get them inside. Concentrate on the 3rd floor. That's where the residence is. I want nobody getting above the 2nd floor." He was pulling on his jacket as he talked, moving toward the hallway. "And get Naya and the boy to the interior room. Now. Not in 2 minutes. Now." He knocked on Nia's door as he passed it. She opened it immediately, which told him she'd been awake and alert. She was dressed fully, which told him more. She took one look at his face. "What's happening?" she said. "Sung's people are outside. I need you and Malik in the back room, the one without exterior windows." She didn't argue. She didn't ask follow-up questions. She turned, went to Malik's room, and her voice came through the door, calm and specific. "Buddy, we're moving to the game room. Come on." Jae-hyun went to the stairwell. He had a weapon. He'd been carrying one since the day Pak confirmed the Sung connection, a weight against his ribs that he'd hoped would remain theoretical. He went down 1 floor and positioned himself where he could see the building's main internal corridor and the secondary entrance from the parking level. He waited. Pak arrived in 7 minutes, which was 1 minute better than estimated. He came through the parking level with 2 men, and they moved through the building's lower floors quickly and without noise, the practiced sweep of people who'd done similar things in different rooms. The 3 vehicles outside hadn't moved. "They're watching the front," Pak said, appearing at Jae-hyun's position. His voice was barely above a murmur. "1 team staged at the parking entrance on the south side. How many total?" "We count 9. Maybe 10. Jae-hyun's people in the building numbered 7, including himself. Not comfortable odds. Not impossible ones. "The parking entrance is their primary approach," Jae-hyun said. "The front is the secondary, since they'll come through the front if we close off the parking. Or they hit both simultaneously. Then we split." He thought for 3 seconds. "You take the parking, 3 men. Hold that entrance and don't let them get past the 1st level. I'll take the front with the remaining 3. "You should be upstairs." "Upstairs is covered. I'm more useful down here." Pak looked at him with the expression of a man who disagreed and knew it wouldn't matter. "The police are not going to arrive in time for what's about to happen." He checked his watch. "We file a disturbance call in 2 minutes. That gives us a response window of 8 to 12 minutes. We need this contained before then." The parking level door opened, not gently. It came open hard and fast, and the next 40 seconds were the kind of thing that didn't resolve cleanly in memory afterward. Motion and noise, and the complete abandonment of anything that wasn't immediate and physical. Pak moved toward the parking level with his 3 men, and the sound of the confrontation there was controlled but unmistakable. The specific percussion of people in a confined space making fast and violent decisions. Jae-hyun held the corridor. 2 men came through the front entrance. They were fast, and they were professional. And the first one was almost at the stairwell before Jae-hyun's people engaged. And the fight that followed was close range and brutal, and nothing like the choreographed version of these things, which was always cleaner and more sequential than reality allowed. Reality was simultaneous and overlapping, and it required you to make decisions about where your body was in space while your body was already there doing things before the decisions finished processing. He took a hit to the left shoulder, an elbow, hard and deliberate, that sent him into the wall, and he used the wall to push back off. And the man who'd hit him was good. But Jaehyun was running on something that had very little to do with technique. He was thinking about Malik in the back room. He was thinking about the way his son had said, "Are you going to fix it in the kitchen at 2 in the morning?" The corridor was cleared in 4 minutes. 4 minutes is a very long time when you're in it. When it was over, Jaehyun was standing with his back against the wall near the stairwell, and his shoulder was sending him information he was temporarily declining to process. And 2 of Sung's men were on the floor, and his own people were accounting for the others. From the parking level, he could hear Pak's voice, which meant Pak was functional, which was the relevant data. He pushed off the wall and went upstairs. He knocked on the interior room door. 3 knocks. The pattern he'd established with the man stationed outside it. The door opened. Nia was standing in the center of the room with Malik pressed against her side, one arm around him, the other holding a lamp she'd apparently liberated from a side table. Her expression when she saw him was not relief. It was the controlled, coiled alertness of someone who had been prepared to use the lamp and was in the process of reassessing. She looked at his shoulder. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's not bad." Malik looked at the blood with wide eyes. "I'm fine." He crouched down. His shoulder screamed at the movement, and he kept his face even. "I'm fine, Malik. Are you okay?" Malik looked at him very seriously. "I held Mama's hand." "Good. That's exactly right." He stood back up. He looked at Nia. "It's over. Our people have the building. Police are going to be here in the next few minutes, and when they arrive, there's going to be a conversation that—" "I know how to talk to police," she said. He nodded. She was still holding the lamp. She set it down. "How bad is the shoulder?" she said. "I told you. I'm not asking what you want to tell me. I'm asking how bad." He looked at her. The lamp was on the side table, and her arms were at her sides, and she was looking at him with the direct, unsparing attention she'd always given things she was trying to accurately assess. And it occurred to him that this was the most fully he'd seen her in years. Not Nia in the background of his life. Not Nia waiting, but Nia present, here, in a room where something real had happened, looking at him with clear eyes and asking a real question. "It'll need looking at," he admitted. She crossed to the small bathroom, ran water over a hand towel, came back and pressed it to his shoulder with a practicality that had no tenderness in it, but wasn't cold either. He held still. Malik had gone to the corner where his sketch pad had somehow migrated and was drawing with the focused intensity of a child, converting a frightening experience into something with lines he could control. Downstairs, the police arrived. The next 2 hours were the procedural machinery of an incident that would be described in official documents as a security disturbance involving multiple parties. Language that covered the actual shape of events the way a tarp covers a wreck. Jae-hyun spoke to officers. Pak spoke to officers. Sung's men, 3 of whom were ambulatory and 2 of whom required medical attention, were taken into custody and would discover in subsequent days that the timing of their arrest was extremely inconvenient given the investigative files that had been opened that morning. Sung himself was not in the building. He never was. That was the thing about men like Sung. They sent people. They remained behind clean glass at a remove from anything that could be photographed and submitted as evidence. But his people were in custody, and the files were with 2 separate agencies. And Lee Dong-woo was in the protection of an attorney. And Jae-hyun sat in a chair in the safe house living room at 4 in the afternoon with his shoulder bandaged and a cup of coffee going cold beside him. And he looked at his phone where 7 separate updates were aggregating into a picture of an organization, Sung's organization, that was losing its structural integrity in real time. The particular unraveling that happened when the foundation of something was pulled and the weight above it began to shift. It wasn't over. Sung was still out there, still behind his clean glass, still in possession of the evidence about Nia's firm, and still capable of deploying it, and still, this was the part that sat in Jae-hyun's chest like a stone, still capable of pointing a threat at a 6-year-old boy who was in the next room drawing dinosaurs. It wasn't over until Sung was in a position where deploying anything cost more than it was worth. He was close. One piece remained. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and felt the last variable click into place. The information he'd been waiting for, the one that would either complete the geometry or force him to rebuild the calculation from scratch. It was from the attorney handling Lee's. The message from the attorney was 4 sentences long. Lee Dongwoo's documentation had been authenticated. Both investigative agencies had issued formal notices of inquiry to Min Jun Sung's registered holding companies. A third agency, the Prosecution Service's Financial Crimes Unit, had independently requested the same documentation after receiving a tip from inside one of Sung's own organizations, which meant someone else had decided the ship was sinking and had started looking for a different boat. The fourth sentence, Sung's attorney had contacted Lee's attorney 40 minutes ago requesting a meeting. Jae-hyun read it twice. He set the phone on his knee and looked at the middle distance for a moment. Not thinking exactly, more like letting the shape of things settle into clarity the way sediment settles when the water stops moving. The shoulder ached. The coffee beside him was cold. From the next room came the sound of Malik narrating something to himself in the quiet, absorbed way he did when he was deep in a drawing, a running commentary on a world that only he could see. He picked up the phone and called the attorney directly. "Don't let Sung's people near Lee," he said when she answered. "Whatever they're offering, Lee doesn't meet with anyone from that side until the formal inquiry is past the point where testimony can be retracted." "Understood. That was already my position." "And the tax documentation, the material about my wife's firm." A brief pause. "We anticipated that. I filed a preemptive disclosure with the Revenue Authority this morning. Voluntary compliance, full documentation of the firm's establishment and income history. Your wife's attorney signed off an hour ago." He was quiet for a second. "She has an attorney. She retained one 3 days ago. A good one." He could hear something careful in the attorney's voice, the professional restraint of someone who understood that this information occupied complicated territory. "She's been handling her own matters, Mr. Kwan, competently." He thought about Naya in the small office on the 3rd floor, legal pad on the desk, Song Mi-yeon's voice in her ear. He thought about 3 years of work he hadn't known existed. "Thank you," he said, and ended the call. He sat with the bandaged shoulder and the cold coffee and the sound of his son in the next room for another minute. Then he stood up and knocked on the door frame. Malik looked up from the sketchpad. "Can I see?" Jae-hyun said. Malik held it up. It was the safe house, recognizable in the way children's drawings were recognizable, rendered in the logic of what was important rather than what was visually accurate. Large windows, a door with many locks, which Malik had drawn with evident interest. 3 figures in the central room, same as always, tall and dark-haired, tall with the cloud of hair, small between them. Except this time the small one was holding both of the tall one's hands. Jae-hyun looked at the drawing for a moment. "That's good," he said. "I know," Malik said, with the serene confidence of someone who has not yet learned to undervalue his own work. Jae-hyun went to find Naya. She was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her laptop open and the prospectus for the song meeting spread beside it. She'd been working. She'd been working the entire time, through the incident, through the police, through the bandaging of his shoulder, through all of it. He'd watched her do it in intervals, the way she moved between managing the immediate crisis and returning to the document, the split focus of a woman who had learned not to let emergencies consume everything else she was. She heard him come in and didn't look up immediately. "Sung's organization is unraveling," he said. "I heard." She turned a page on the prospectus. "The attorney called me, too." "Your attorney?" "Yes." She looked up then, direct and unhesitating. "I should have had one years ago. That's on me." "It's on me." "It's on both of us for different reasons." She closed the prospectus. "What happens to Sung?" "The agencies are moving. The financial crimes inquiry alone will take his operation apart over the next 6 months. The structure Lee documented is the skeleton of everything he runs. Pull it out, and the rest collapses." He leaned against the opposite counter. "He won't be prosecuted for what he did to us specifically. The photograph, the operation against our marriage, none of that is criminal in a way that translates to charges. But his financial crimes are substantial and documented, and he's going to spend the next several years managing consequences that will leave him no bandwidth for anything else." She was quiet for a moment. "And Yuri Seo?" "She was a mechanism. She'll face some civil exposure if you want to pursue it." That's your decision. I don't want to pursue it. She said it without hesitation, which surprised him slightly. I don't want to spend energy on her. She was a tool someone else picked up. I'm more interested in the hand that swung it. Sung is handled. I know. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to do something about it. I'm telling you my priorities. She picked up her coffee. What about your organization, the partner agreements? Oh, he exhaled. This was the part he'd been turning over since the Yeouido conference room, since Sung had laid out the board and Jae Hyun had finally seen the full scope of what had been moved while he was looking elsewhere. Oh, is a conversation I need to have in person. 2 of the 3 agreements can be recovered. Those partners made calculations based on what they thought was a stable situation, and the situation has changed. The 3rd one, he paused. Probably gone. Sung gave them something I can't match on the terms they care about. Can you absorb it? Financially, yes. Structurally, it's a 6-month rebuild. He looked at her steadily. There's also the question of the exposure from my own filings. Opening 2 agency inquiries into Sung meant accepting that some of the documentation would reflect on my operation as well. My attorneys are managing it, but there will be a period of oversight that changes how I can operate. She held his gaze. How much of it stays legitimate and how much of it goes back to what it was? The question was precise and unapologetic, and he understood that she was not asking it as a negotiation. She was asking it because she needed accurate information and she had stopped accepting the managed version. I don't know yet, he said. Some of what I built can transition. Some of it... He stopped. He started again because she deserved the real sentence. Some of it was never going to survive being looked at directly. She nodded. She looked out the kitchen window at the building's interior courtyard, the small square of afternoon light. I have a meeting tomorrow, she said. He blinked. The song meeting. I moved it up again, tomorrow 2 o'clock. She turned back. The voluntary disclosure cleared the firm. There's no tax issue. Song's team reviewed it, and they're satisfied. She said it without triumph, just fact. I'm going to go to that meeting, and I'm going to close it. I know you will. She looked at him carefully. I'm not telling you because I need your approval. I know that too. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not quite, but the specific recognition of 2 people who have been through the same storm from different positions and have both come out changed on the other side. Jae Hyun. She said his name the way she used to say it, years ago, when things were simpler, or at least when the complexity was a different shape, with weight, with the acknowledgement that the name contained a real person she was addressing. What do you want? Not from the situation. What do you actually want? He looked at her. He thought about 11 years. He thought about the apartment in Itaewon with the thin walls. He thought about a table with a wobbling leg and a letter with 6 words, and a small boy holding both of the tall figure's hands in a drawing that would probably get left somewhere in this building and lost forever. I want my son to grow up knowing his father was worth knowing, he said. That's the clearest thing I have right now. She held that for a moment. And us, she said. It wasn't a leading question. It was a real one. I don't know what us looks like from here, he said. I know what I lost. I know what I spent 7 years not seeing. I don't know if those are things you can rebuild from or if they're just what they are. She was quiet. But I'm not going to pretend, he said. I spent our marriage pretending in the specific way that people pretend when they're telling themselves a story about who they are and what they're providing and why that's enough. I'm done with that. She looked at him for a long time. The afternoon light was moving across the kitchen floor in that slow way it did in the late hour, long and golden and slightly sad, the light that belonged to the end of things. I'm not coming back, she said, not to what it was. I know. The firm is mine. Malik's schedule is mine. The decisions about where we live and what school he goes to, those are mine until you've earned the right to be in that conversation. Yes. That's not a short process. I know. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned back to the prospectus and opened it, and the conversation was over. Not badly, not with the door slammed, just finished, the way real conversations finished when everything true had been said and there was nothing left to add. He went back to the living room. He sat down. He picked up his phone and called Chairman O. O answered on the third ring, which meant he'd been expecting the call. There was a quality to his silence when he heard Jae-hyun's voice. Not guilt exactly, but the careful stillness of a man who knew he owed something and was calculating the denomination. "I'm not calling to argue the agreement," Jae-hyun said. "I'm calling to tell you that Sung's operation is under formal inquiry as of this morning. The Financial Crimes Unit has documentation covering everything he's run through Yongsan and Mapo for the last 4 years. Whatever he offered you is going to be administered by attorneys and prosecutors inside of 6 months." A silence on the line. "I'm also not calling to offer you a better deal," Jae-hyun continued. "I'm calling because we've worked together for 9 years, and I thought you deserved to hear what I know from me directly, so you can make whatever decisions you need to make with accurate information." O was quiet for a long moment. "Sung approached me in March," O said finally, "before any of this. He had information about some of my own operations that would have been inconvenient. It wasn't a choice I made freely." "I understand. I should have told you." "Yes." Another silence. "What happens now?" "That depends on what you do in the next week," Jae-hyun said. "If your attorney reaches out to the Financial Crimes Unit with voluntary information about Sung's approach to you, the coercion, the information he held, that's useful to the investigation, and it positions you differently than if you wait and get caught in the inquiry as a collaborator." "You're giving me a way out." "I'm giving you accurate information about your options. What you do with it is yours." He ended the call. He sat back. The shoulder pulsed with a dull, insistent pain that he was managing by treating it as background information rather than foreground. He'd been injured before in ways that mattered more and less than this. The body kept a kind of ledger of its own, separate from everything else. And what it was telling him now was that he was 41 years old and tired in a way that went deeper than the shoulder, a tiredness that had been accumulating for years beneath the performance of being unmovable. He was movable. Nia had always known that. It was possibly the thing about him she'd known most clearly that he'd spent the most energy denying. Minjun Sung called at 7 in the evening, not through an attorney, directly. His personal number, which Jae-hyun had because there had been a time years ago before the Cold War distance settled between them, when they had been something closer to colleagues. He answered. "You moved fast," Sung said. His voice was the same, settled, patient, the voice of a man who believed in the long game. But there was something different in the register now, a quality of reassessment. "I had good information," Jae-hyun said. "Lee." Not a question. Among others, a silence. "You're going to take significant exposure from this. Your own operation is my concern. I'm trying to tell you that this outcome isn't clean for you either. I know that." He looked at the wall. "You told me in the conference room that you didn't want a war. You said wars were expensive and tedious. You were right about that. What you miscalculated was that I'd reached the point where the expense didn't matter. Because of the woman. Because of my family." He let that sit for a second. "There's a difference. The woman is my wife, and she's going to be fine entirely without anything I do. My family is my son, and whatever he grows up believing is possible in the world. You put your hand on that." He paused. That was the mistake. Sung was quiet for a long time. "What do you want?" Sung said. "Nothing from you. The agencies have what they have. That process runs its course, and there's nothing either of us can do to accelerate or stop it. I'm not going to negotiate with you about it, and I'm not going to make a deal that leaves your operation intact in exchange for anything." He kept his voice level and final. "I want you to understand clearly that this is done. Not managed, not paused, done." Another silence. "You're walking away from a significant piece of your own empire to accomplish this," Sung said. There was something in his voice that was almost, not respect, but adjacent to it. The acknowledgement of a man who understood the cost of something. "Yes." "Why?" "I already told you why." He ended the call. He held the phone in his lap for a moment. Outside the safe house windows, the city was doing what it always did. Moving, glowing, consuming its own energy in the endless metabolic process of a place that never fully stopped. He'd loved this city once, with the uncomplicated love of ambition, the way you love the place that made you. He still loved it, but differently now, the way you love something after you've seen it clearly, which was more complicated and more true. His phone rang again. It was Pak. O's attorney contacted the inquiry unit 40 minutes ago, Pak said. Voluntary submission of information regarding coercive conduct. He gave them everything Sung used against him. Good. The cascade is accelerating. 2 more of Sung's coordinators have retained separate attorneys. They're not talking yet, but the attorneys filing appearances is its own signal. It'll take months to fully resolve. Yes, but the containment is done. He's managing consequences now, not planning offensives. Jae-hyun exhaled. And our exposure, the inquiry into our operation. Your attorney says it's manageable. The financial crimes unit is focused on Sung. We're peripheral. There will be some required disclosures, some restructuring. She thinks 6 to 8 months of oversight and then it normalizes. Normalizes into what? A smaller operation. Cleaner. More legitimate than before. A pause. She said, and I'm quoting, that this is an opportunity if you choose to treat it as one. He sat with that. Thank you, Pak, he said. Go home. Sleep. Sir, I mean it. Go home. He put the phone down. He sat in the quiet of the safe house and listened to the building. Nia's laptop clicking softly in the kitchen. She was still working, or working again. Malik's silence from the back room, the specific silence of a small child in deep sleep. The building's ventilation, the distant city. He stayed in the chair until midnight. Then he went down the hall and stood in the doorway of the room where Malik was sleeping. Same position as always, so stomach down, face to the side, the elephant under one arm, the complete physical abandonment of a child who trusts without reservation. Hae-hyun stood in the doorway and looked at his son and felt the full weight of the last 4 weeks move through him in a single, slow wave. He did not go in. He just stood there. After a while, he became aware that Nia was standing in the hallway behind him. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. They both stood in the corridor outside their son's door in the midnight quiet of a building that had been a crisis and was now becoming, tentatively, a place where people slept. He didn't reach for her hand. She didn't reach for his. That wasn't where they were, and they both understood it. But they stood there together for a while. That was something. Spring came to Seoul the way it always did. Not gradually, but suddenly, as if the city had made a decision overnight. One week the trees were the bare gray architecture of winter, and then they weren't, the blossoms arriving in the specific extravagance of things that only lasted a short time and knew it. Nia's meeting with Song Mi-yeon had closed 3 months ago. Brooks Asset Management had taken on 4 new investors in the weeks following. Not a flood, not the overnight transformation of a venture that got lucky, but the steady accumulation of people who had watched the fund's performance and the founder's composure through a period that would have dismantled a less grounded operation, and had decided that this was someone worth betting on. Song had told her directly, I've watched companies fall apart when their principals go through personal disruption. You didn't fall apart. That told me more than the returns did. Nia had nodded and filed that observation away in the category of things that were true and useful and didn't require commentary. She'd moved into a new apartment in Mapo. Her own lease, her own space, the yellow wall in Malik's room that he'd requested and that she'd painted herself on a Saturday while he directed from the doorway, the elephant tucked under his arm, with the authority of a project manager who had strong opinions about coverage near the baseboards. The apartment was 3 subway stops from Jae-hyun's building. That was a number they'd discussed with the careful specificity of people who were building a new arrangement without a template, making decisions about distance and access with the particular attention you paid when you understood that what you were constructing would be the foundation of a child's life, whether you got it right or not. Malik spent Tuesdays and Thursdays and alternate weekends with Jae-hyun. Those were the terms, established through attorneys, documented, functional. The first Tuesday, Nia had sat in her car outside Jae-hyun's building for 4 minutes after dropping Malik off. Not because she was uncertain about the arrangement, but because 4 minutes was apparently what it took to adjust to the physical reality of leaving her son somewhere and driving away. Then she'd driven away. She'd been fine. Malik had been more than fine. He'd come back on Thursday with a drawing of the view from Jae-hyun's office window, all the city's angles and lights rendered in the abstract, faithful logic of a 6-year-old's eye. and the information that his father had taught him how to use chopsticks properly, which he demonstrated at dinner with a precision that Nia recognized as Jae-hyun's particular insistence on doing small things correctly. That recognition had moved through her like something she wasn't ready to name. Jae-hyun had spent the 3 months doing what he'd said he would do, which was the specific surprise of it. He had actually done what he said. The operation had been restructured, smaller, cleaner. The parts that couldn't survive direct examination quietly dissolved or transferred or simply discontinued. The parts that could survive it reorganized under legitimate corporate frameworks with the kind of oversight that had, according to Pak, made 3 of his senior people extremely uncomfortable and 2 of them considerably relieved. He was not a reformed man. Nia held no illusions about the clean narrative of transformation. He was a man who had made a specific decision about what he was willing to sacrifice and had followed through on it, which was different from transformation and was, in her estimation, more durable than transformation and more honest. He called on Fridays, not to negotiate schedules or discuss logistics. They handled those through the attorneys for anything requiring documentation and through Pak for the informal daily things. He called on Fridays because Malik wanted to tell him about the week, and Jae-hyun listened in the particular way he was learning to listen, which was fully and without his phone in the other hand. And Malik always ended the call satisfied in the way of someone who has been genuinely heard. Nia stayed on her side of those calls, close enough to assist if needed, far enough to give them the space to be what they were becoming. Min Jun-sung's formal inquiry had expanded twice since the initial filing. 3 of his coordinators had accepted cooperation agreements. The Financial Crimes Unit had frozen assets connected to 4 of his primary shell structures. He was managing it. He was a man with resources and lawyers, and the kind of institutional knowledge that made him effective even in retreat. But managing it was all he was doing. The offensive capacity was gone. The threat that had hung over a safe house hallway in Seodaemun-gu in the winter was gone with it. Yuri Seo had left Seoul. Nia didn't know where she'd gone and didn't look for the information. Yuri had been a mechanism in someone else's plan, and while Nia had no warmth for her and no forgiveness, she was interested in performing. She also understood that spending energy on her was energy taken from things that deserved it more. She had let it go the way you let go of something that was never really yours to begin with, without ceremony, without drama. Just a day when she realized she hadn't thought about it and understood that this was the new condition. The school ceremony was on a Thursday in late April. It was not a graduation. Malik was 6, which, in the accounting of accomplishments, made him eligible for an end-of-year classroom celebration rather than a commencement, but the school had dressed it up with sashes and small certificates and the organized chaos of 40 small children trying to sit still in chairs while their families watched from the gymnasium's folding seats. Jae-hyun was there. Nia had told him about it 3 weeks in advance. She had told him with the specific, deliberate neutrality of a person who was extending an invitation without pressure, making clear that the choice was real rather than performative. He'd said he would come, and she'd thought, with the particular skepticism earned by 7 years of watching this man prioritize the wrong things, we'll see. He was there when she arrived. Standing near the entrance to the gymnasium, in clothes that were not the charcoal suit of the man who ate at private restaurants on the 54th floor, just dark jeans, a plain jacket, hands in his pockets. No security she could see, though she suspected Pak was somewhere in the vicinity exercising the professional discretion of a man who understood that this occasion called for invisibility. He nodded at her. She nodded back. They sat 3 seats apart in the folding chairs and watched their son's class file in, each small person wearing their sash with varying degrees of enthusiasm and coordination. Malik found them immediately with the precision of a child who always knows where the important people are in a room. His face went through a sequence: recognition, surprise at the conjunction, and then something simple and enormous and completely unguarded that he didn't have the age to conceal yet, and that Nia felt in her sternum like a struck note. Both of them. Here. Together. She watched Jae-hyun watch their son's face. She saw him receive that expression and what it did to him. The ceremony proceeded with the gentle disorganization of all events organized around small children. Certificates presented in an order that seemed alphabetical until it suddenly wasn't. A song that half the class remembered and half invented in real time. A moment when a small girl in the front row dropped her sash and the ensuing retrieval operation became briefly the entire focus of the room. When Malik's name was called, he walked to the front with the deliberate, self-conscious seriousness of a person who understood he was being observed and had decided to be dignified about it. He accepted his certificate with both hands. He looked out at the audience, found them in the third row, and produced a smile of such uncomplicated happiness that Nia had to look at the ceiling for a second. Afterward, while the families milled in the courtyard and small children processed the large excitement of the morning, Jae-hyun crouched down and adjusted Malik's sash, which had migrated during the ceremony to an angle that satisfied no one. Malik submitted to this with the patience of someone accustomed to a father who paid attention to small things done correctly, and when it was straight, he looked at it and then at Jae-hyun and said something Nia was too far away to hear. Jae-hyun said something back. Malik laughed. It was the first time she'd seen Jae-hyun make their son laugh in a long time, and the sight of it, unguarded, unperformed, the specific helpless laughter of a small boy, and the specific unguarded expression of a man who had caused it, moved through her like the first real warm day after a long winter, the kind of warmth that surprised you every time, despite knowing the season would turn. She walked over. The three of them stood in the school courtyard beneath the cherry blossoms, which were in fact falling, because this was Seoul in late April, and the trees were not interested in the symbolism, but were simply doing what they did. And the noise of other families moved around them, and Malik was already telling her something about the certificate and what he planned to do with it, which apparently involved taping it to the wall next to the dinosaurs. She looked at Jae-hyun over Malik's head. He looked back. There were no speeches in that look, no negotiated terms. There was what there was, the full, unedited weight of everything that had happened, the photograph, and the letter, and the safe house hallway, and the coffee at 2 a.m., and the attorney calls, and the 3 months of Fridays, and the small boy standing between them explaining his archival intentions regarding a certificate. There was what they'd broken. There was what they'd each built in the rubble. There was the question of whether those two structures could exist in the same geography without one of them collapsing the other, and the honest answer was that neither of them knew yet. And the older, harder, more truthful answer was that not knowing was not the same as no. Malik ran ahead on the path to where another small friend had appeared, the elephant bouncing in his backpack, his sash still slightly crooked from the adjustment. Nia and Jae-hyun walked behind him. The courtyard was full of light and noise and the ordinary extravagance of a spring afternoon in a city that had survived another winter and was doing what cities did, moving forward, making noise, refusing to hold still for anything, even the things worth holding still for. After a while, without planning it and without remarking on it, she reached for his hand. Not because the past was gone. The past was exactly where it was, intact and specific, and hers to carry in her own way for the rest of her life. Not because she had forgiven everything or decided that love was simpler than it had turned out to be, or that the next version of this would be easier than the last. Because her son was ahead of them on a path in the April light, laughing at something she couldn't see. Because that was a future. Because she had spent the last 4 months building something that was entirely hers and discovering that what was entirely hers left room, still, for this, for the man who was not the king anymore, who was not the empire, who was a father trying to earn the right to be called one and doing the work that right required. Because she was not a woman who wasted things. His hand was there and she took it and they walked. Above them, the cherry blossoms came down without agenda or symbolism, just the biological fact of a season doing what seasons did, releasing what couldn't be held anymore, covering the ground in something brief and specific and light. Malik reached the end of the path and turned around to see if they were coming. They were. Fade out.